and amen. Can we give Jesus a round of applause? And can you guys, as you take your seats, take your hand with me, and then bring it to your other shoulder, and pat yourself on the back right here. You guys came out to church on daylight savings, all right? So give yourselves a round of applause, pat yourselves on the back. You guys have done what most people are not willing to do here. Able is a different question, but willing. Today, after service today, and so with that said, we've strategically decided to have one of the most important gatherings on the day of daylight savings. It is called Base Camp. It's a time where if you guys are considering or would like to participate in just what God is doing here, it's going to be a time for us just to kind of rehash mission, vision, values, and for you guys to kind of look at just what it looks like to be a part of what God is doing here. And we're going to have lunch served. So that's just, if you guys want to serve, that's for you guys. And would love to have you guys be a part of it. I'm going to have some giveaways for that too. So just stick around. It's going to be a fun time and just even for us to get to know each other. All right. With that being said, today I'm giving a message and a talk on promises. All right. Promises. And I think some of the most promises that we can make are the promises that we make to ourselves. Right. So let me ask you guys. Is there anyone in this room who on January 1st made a resolution to themselves and have actually stuck to it? Raise your hands. Oh, Ed? Anyone else? Ed? Yeah? Well, what is that? What is that? What was your resolution? Being healthier and going, and you stuck to it? It shows, my friend. It shows. Your t-shirts are getting a little tighter, but in like a good way, not in like a old dad muscly kind of way, but in a good way. Appreciate that. Okay, then anyone else? Okay, let me ask. Since Lent has started on February 14th, and if you guys have, let me see a raise of hands. Who has decided to fast some particular thing, whether it's sweets? Yeah. Oh, that's it. How many guys who have actually stuck to what you guys have said that you guys were going to fast? Oh my goodness. Last week we found out all the criminals. This week we find out all the dedicated Christians here. All right, Musola, Sarah, what have you guys decided to fast? Social media. Both of you guys together? Awesome. All right, you know what? That deserves a good prize here. Can you guys come up to the front? All right, Ed, come here. I have something for you, my friend. Bag of fun, free things. All right, Ed, come here. It is a water bottle, love/fear, revelation, wellness. Here you go, my friend. Enjoy the water as you guys are on your fitness journey. Hydration. All righty, Sarah, this is for you. Sarah, I'm going to pull out a good one here. This is a Better Together sweater. If you feel this, don't touch it because it's hers now. If you feel it, you're going to see that this is good quality. This is good quality. Like, you can feel the weight of it. It's heavy. Here you go. I hope that fits. You get what you pay for here. All right, and Musola, my man, I'm going to give you this book. It's written by my friend Terry Smith. The Lord bless you. 28-day journey to experiencing God's extravagant blessings. All right. Can we give them a round of applause for keeping the promises that they've made to themselves? I feel like it says a lot that we don't even make promises to ourselves anymore. We just kind of, hey, we're all on a journey, right? This is not to condemn or make anyone feel bad. I've broken my fast a couple times already, but we do what we can do. All right, let's begin. We are in our Lent series called The God of Second Chances. And today we're going to be looking into the story of Abraham. He is considered the father of faith. He is one of the first characters and earliest characters in the Bible. And we're going to be talking about specifically his journey from a person who was a promise seeker to a person who was believing in the promise keeper. And so let me read the passage for us. It's out of Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 4. And it says this: "The Lord had said to Abram, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you.' So Abram went as the Lord God had told him." That is the word of the Lord. Just as a quick summary, Abram, he was called by God in this moment to go to a far-off land, away from his country and his own people. And the promise was that God was going to make him into a great nation, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of the entire world. I talk about this all the time, but the principle of he does one for all, right? What he does for one, he wants to do for all. And that's basically the kingdom principle that we see here set early on in the book of Genesis, that he wants to do for the Israelites and for Abraham and his family and his descendants what he wants to do for the entire world. So that's the promise. And the implicit promise in here is that he will have a descendant. He'll have a child. And Abraham, right in this moment, his name's not even Abraham yet, it's Abram. His name gets changed after the circumcision. But in this moment, he's 75 years old. I'm not going to ask if there's anyone 75 here or not, but if you are, you already deserve a giveaway, so bless you, right? Or close to it, bless you. I give you my blessing, right? But Abram's 75 years old. And usually at this point of his life, you're kind of thinking about the last segment of your life. But God tells him a promise and says, "I'm going to give you a descendant, an heir, and you will be a great nation, and you'll be blessed, and you'll be a blessing to everybody." So if you look at this, not just this moment, but in human existence, every single person on planet Earth, we're all promise seekers. We're all seeking a promise. And we may not even use that language explicitly, but every single person in this room, we are seeking out a promise. You're seeking out a promise for your safety, your security. You're seeking a promise for your sense of meaning and self-worth. You're seeking out promises for your future, things that you're hoping for. You're seeking out promises in relationships. Literally, marriage is considered a promise. It's called a promise, a covenant between you and your spouse. So we're all looking for someone or something that we could find that sense of assurance. The reason why, as human beings, we've been created and designed as promise seekers is because we're looking for someone or something to create that sense of assurance in our humanity, in who we are and what we have. We're all promise seekers. And as good promise seekers, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the promise keepers. Promise seekers seeking promise keepers. That's kind of the promise dilemma, what I like to call the promise dilemma. This is just all of human existence. We're looking for, as promise seekers, promise keepers who will assure our sense of security, safety, who will assure our future, our meaning, our purpose, and our relationships. That is the promise dilemma. For example, have you guys ever heard this before? Often a bridesmaid, never a bride. Have you heard of that phrase? Do you know where that came from? It came from Listerine. In the 1920s, Listerine, they basically put out an ad, a commercial, kind of preying on the insecurities of single women, saying, the reason why you are not married and fulfilled and have a husband is because your breath stank. It sounds ridiculous now. But Listerine, their profits went from $100,000 in 1921 to $4 million 5 years later. $4 million in the 20s? That's a lot right now, but $4 million in the 20s? That's a bajillion dollars right now, right? So Listerine, what did they do? They preyed on the sensibilities of young single women, saying that the reason why you're not married Women looking for the promise of marriage. The reason why you don't have this in your life, the reason why you don't have the security of a marriage or a relationship or a husband is because you got halitosis in your teeth. That's the problem. We're here as a promise keeper to fulfill that promise. We want to make sure you get married, so we're going to cure that. But the truth is Listerine, were they really keeping a promise? No. What did they do? All they did was make a promise. They made a promise. They actually named this woman Eleanor. Can you imagine an ad like this now being run? It's not going to work. You're going to lose money. They named this woman Eleanor, saying she has bad breath, which is why she's always going to be a bridesmaid. But Listerine, they weren't keeping promises. What were they doing? They were making them. And so what do you have? The promise dilemma is that we are promise seekers looking for promise keepers, but because we can never actually find a perfect promise keeper, what do? We settle with promise makers. We settle with Listerine, hoping that maybe if I just wash my teeth right, I'll get married. We settle with promise makers. And Listerine is the perfect example of that. It's like humanity seeking paradise, but we just settle for the path. It's people looking for destiny, but for us just settling with direction. What we've become is we've become a society of skeptical and unfulfilled promise seekers, trusting in false and imperfect promise makers. So what do we have? We just have a society of promise seekers. We have a society of people pining for, clamoring for any sense of assurance, security, safety, anything that will assure our future, our hope. We're looking for things, people, for any way to assure our future. We're surrounded by promise makers. This was years ago, I think a rough estimate was I spent around $4 billion. No, $400 billion just across the world making promises. And I know Listerine seems ridiculous and it seems hardcore of an example, but we are surrounded by all these different promise makers telling us that if you have this, you'll be where you want to be. If you have that, you'll feel safe and secure with yourselves. We are looking for promise keepers. But the truth is, there's only one person in all of human history who's been the perfect, genuine, true promise keeper. And that is our God the Father. That is Jesus Christ. He's been the only one who's been able to keep his promises. I was listening to a talk the other day of a smart theologian and a non-Christian asking him, what is the reason for the credibility of the Bible? Do you know what he said? He didn't talk about love. He didn't talk about the values or morals. What he talked about was every single prophecy, every single promise that was made in Scripture has been kept, was fulfilled. That's the one valid reason why our Bible has any legitimacy, is because God has kept every single one. 100% promise rate. I don't know about you guys, but that seems better than any other stock profile. That seems better than any investment that you've made in your life. 100% return of God's blessing and his investment. Abraham was a story of second chances, the second chances of a promise seeker to put his trust in the only promise keeper. Over and over again, Abraham had multiple chances for him to put his trust in God and God alone. He oftentimes put his trust in wrong things, but we're going to look at 3 examples when Abraham had a second chance, 3 specific second chances for him to place his trust in God and God alone. And I've attached, just to make it simple for you guys, I've attached 3 mantras to these 3 stories or 3 instances in Abraham's life. 3 mantras. Maybe you guys can repeat after me, all right? Let's start. God has a plan for me. Let's say this together from the top. God has a plan for me. God is in this with me. And lastly, God is fighting for me. God has a plan for me. God is in this with me, and God is fighting for me. Abraham failed almost 3 times here. And in those 3 chances, God was giving him the chance to no longer trust in promise makers, but for him to trust in the promise keeper. So let's look at this. The first one, Genesis chapter 15, verse 1 to 6. Abraham, this is his story. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I'm your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I have remained childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my house will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Genesis chapter 15 was roughly 10 years after Genesis chapter 12. So no longer is he a sprightly young 75-year-old man. He is a sprightly middle-aged 85-year-old man. And from 10 years, that promise was spoken that you will be a great nation, that you'll have descendants, that you'll have an heir to the throne of your kingdom. 10 years. After a bit of time, I'm sure like many of us, we'd get a little discouraged, a little frustrated. And you could see that. Abram was frustrated. What did he say? He said, You've given me no children. And not even just that, he throws another statement on top of that, and he says, What can you give me? What could you do for me? And think about the context of the story. Abram right now, he's having a crisis of faith. And think about what's actually happening here in this moment. Abram is literally having an audible conversation with God. How many of you guys have had an audible conversation with God? Oh my gosh, someone actually rose their hand. Well, God bless you, right? I haven't. I don't know about you guys, but I haven't. On top of that, Abram was being encouraged by God. What does God say? I am your very great reward. I am your shield. Do not be afraid. So God, in his omnipotence, meets Abram, and he's encouraging him, actually having an audible voice conversation with him. But to Abram, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And you know, the religious sensibilities in us, if you have religious sensibilities, what that will tell us is like, oh, Abram should have been grateful. Oh, Abram should have been smarter. No, that's the religious sensibility. The human sensibility, what is it? The human sensibility is that it kind of makes sense. You see, God was not offended by Abram. What did God do? God took Abram by the hand. He took him outside, and he showed them the night sky. I don't know how this must have looked like. I always wanted to kind of get a picture of, okay, like what did this instance look like? What did he come in bodily form? Who knows? But he took him by the hand, brought him outside, and said, look at the sky. Look at the stars. Can you count them? Can you see how many there are? No. And so shall your offspring be. If you look at this, I know this is like just a digital image, but if you look at this night sky, and you know, you see the moonlit night sky, it's kind of blue. If you kind of think about it, what does this look like? It looks like a blueprint. It looks like as if God is showing Abram the embodiment, a physical picture, representation of the plan that God has for Abram. And you know what? God spoke that in Abram's life 10 years ago, and Abram hasn't seen an ounce of that promise, hasn't seen an inch of the fulfillment of that. His wife is just getting older. He's getting older. There's no children coming out of his wife's womb, but yet God takes him outside, shows him the night sky, and shows him the blueprint, the plan In Abram's crisis of faith, God does not condemn Abram. What does he do? He encourages Abram with the plan that he has for him. God has a plan for him. God has a plan for you. And he's literally showing him the blueprint. God was giving Abram a second chance as a promise seeker to trust in the promise keeper. And in this moment, it works out. Because what does it do? What does it say? Abram believed, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Abram believed. So this was, yes, success. He took the second chance and he ran with it and he did it well. But the thing is, the reality is, a blueprint is still just a blueprint. It's not the actual house, right? No one can sleep in a blueprint. You can't eat in a blueprint. You can't live in a blueprint. It's just a plan. And so we have to ask ourselves, can you trust the blueprint? Can you trust the plan? The blueprint is not the house. It's just the plans for it. And that's what God will do sometimes. God won't give us the house. He won't show us the bed. He won't actually open the fridge, but he'll show us the plan. He'll show us the blueprint. And we have to ask ourselves, is that enough? Is that enough? Can you believe in the plan? Because if you can't believe in the plan, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll believe in the product. If you can't believe in the blueprint, then it doesn't necessarily translate to you actually believing in the physical manifestation of a child. Some of us, we've denied the blueprint. We've denied the plan. Say, God, I'm not going to believe you until I see that child. But Abram, he didn't. He believed God in his second chance, saying, this blueprint is enough. I'll believe in you. God has a plan for me. Can we say that together? God has a plan for me. Second here, Genesis 15, verse 1 to 5. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, who was also known as Sarah, had borne him no children. Right? This is the next chapter. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. There are three predictable results that happen. Three predictable responses that happen when you don't know or believe that God is not with you in this. The second mantra is that God is in this with you. God is in whatever situation that you're in, he's in it with you. But if you don't believe that God is in this with you, there are three predictable things that happen. First, control. Genesis 16 was an example of Sarai taking the promise and the prophetic word of God, saying that you will have children, and taking that promise into her own hands and trying to control the promise of God. So what does she do? She takes her slave, her Egyptian slave, and makes her husband sleep with her in order to have children. To us, that sounds ridiculous and crazy in this post-Christian world. But at that time, that child legally would have belonged to who? Sarai, not Hagar. But if you actually read the story more, Sarai, she's kind of just acting out and going out of control. She's losing her mind to the point when Hagar actually conceives and has a child, which legally belongs to her now, what happens? Sarah gets bitter, frustrated, and wants to kick out Hagar. Wants to actually kick out for actually doing the thing that she wanted her to do. So Sarai's just going nuts. That's what control will do. Control will make us go crazy. It'll make us lose our mind. Even when you get the result that you're looking for, if you have your hand of control on it, it doesn't matter the result. It doesn't matter the fruit. You could even get what you're looking for, but you'll still be bitter. You'll still be bitter. Why? Because the issue is not your control. The issue is that you don't believe that God is in this with you. You don't believe that God is in this with you. So Sarai, think about it. Right after these verses, she got everything that she wanted when she put her hands on it. But yet she was still unhappy. That sounds like a good millennial, don't you think? We've done everything that we could do to live the life that we want to live, but yet we're still unhappy. Why? Is it because the fruit wasn't enough? Was it because the result wasn't enough? No, it's because you just don't believe that God is in this with you. When you don't believe that God is in this with you, even you getting what you want is not enough. When you don't believe that God is in this with you, even you getting what you want is not enough. That's what control does. It'll never be enough. The second response is mockery. In Genesis 18, Sarah literally laughs at God. I don't know about you guys, but if God were to manifest himself in this room, I don't think the first thing I would do is laugh at God. But Sarah's laugh wasn't just kind of like a hilarious, joyful laugh. It was a scoffing. To the point where if you read the end of Genesis 18, it's just her and God having a conversation, and it just gets like cut off. There's no resolution to it. God's just like, why did you laugh? And Sarah goes, I didn't laugh. And God goes, no, you did laugh. And she goes, no, I didn't laugh. And God goes, you laughed. And that's it. Boom, done and over with. When God is like, that's how frustrated God was as he was writing this passage. He's like, I can't deal with this anymore. Because this laughter wasn't a laughter of joy. It was a scoffing. And this is where I'm actually compassionate, slightly compassionate to all the atheists and agnostics in our lives and in this world. I can't tell you how many, I don't know why, but my algorithm is full of like skeptics, like the Brian Dawkins and cosmic skeptics of this world. That's like an actual thing, who are just constantly questioning and pressing up against God and the idea of religion and the Bible as a whole, and just calling it like human construct and all like those technical terms and everything. There's constantly people pressing up against it. And there's a part of me that wants to kind of rise up and get frustrated. But there's a part of me that's deeply compassionate. Because what I hear in their voice is not just disdain, but I hear mockery. And when I hear mockery, one of the predictable results of someone who doesn't believe that God is in this with them, then their mockery is not rooted in this sense of just pride and arrogance, but it's rooted in this sense that they don't believe, that they don't know that there is a loving being out there that is in this world with them, in them, living it with them. And so what happens? They're just alone. In their cosmic understanding of the world and of God, they're just alone. So there's a part of me that has compassion. Kind of like with Sarah. She just didn't believe that God was in this with her. So she laughed. She scoffed. Kind of like a good old atheist. But I have compassion. Why? Because in their world, they're alone. They don't believe that God is in this with them. Lastly, this is one of the harder ones to see. One of the predictable responses to someone who doesn't believe that God is in this with them is they'll settle. Genesis 17, Abram says this when he's talking to God. Will a son be born to 100-year-old man? If only Ishmael, the son of Hagar, might live under your blessing. What is he saying? He's saying, God, can a child be born to someone like me? Can't you just use Ishmael? We already have one. Can't you just use that one? I'll settle for that. Because I don't see any promise of Isaac. You see, one of the most quietest, predictable results of that seed of belief that you don't believe that God is with you in this is that you'll just settle. You'll settle for something that looks like the promise but actually isn't. And you'll settle and you'll try to maneuver your way to try to negotiate with God, saying, hey, God, I know the promise was here, but can't you just fulfill it here? And I'll be okay with that. You see, God is in the business of fulfilling the promise, not just something that looks like it. And oftentimes we'll just settle with something that looks like the promise rather than actually going for it. Right? It's like Kirkland. versus the actual product. I mean, I love Kirkland. I think Kirkland is great. But it's kind of a running joke, right? Right? If you buy Kirkland products, oh, this is like this shampoo. It's like the Kirkland version of whatever shampoo it is. This is the Kirkland version of, whatever drink, alcohol, beverage, food, item, luggage thing. Even though they're all made in like the same factories, they just kind of stamp their different name. It's the Kirkland version of it, right? So many of us have settled with the Kirkland version when God is trying to give you the real thing, the real promise. I mean, I know that's a bad illustration because Kirkland is great. It's fantastic. But you guys see what I'm saying, right? God is in this with me. Say this together. God is in this with me. When you don't believe that God is in this with you, these are 3 predictable responses. But when you believe that God is in this with you, the only response that you have is confidence. You walk confidently in knowing that God is with you. You walk into the room knowing and believing that God is with you. That is the predictable result of a promise seeker seeking the promise keeper. Lastly, Genesis 20, verses 1 to 7. This is the biggest mess up. This is actually quite grotesque. But follow along with me here. Verse 1. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abram said to his wife, Sarah, she is my sister. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you are as good as dead because of that woman you have taken. She is a married woman. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did you not say to me, she is my sister? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And didn't she also say, he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I've kept you from sinning against me. And that is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he's a prophet, and he'll pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die. That seems like a pretty scary promise. Abram, he really messed up in this second chance. He thoroughly messed up on this one. He lied, one, about his wife being his wife, who says he was his sister. And in this time when kings would take women, what that means is not like the king would take her to a cup of coffee and hang out. Basically, what this meant was this king took Sarah, into his harem, and she just became one of the royal prostitutes. Abram was basically prostituting his wife. And so he lied. He prostituted his wife, and he was trying to connive and manipulate his way into protection and safety. He did not believe that God could protect him, so what did he do? He's lied his way into protection. And you have to kind of be, this is not right by any means, but you have to understand the circumstances that Abram was in. One is a completely different society, but one, Abram was entering into new territory, unfamiliar land and people. He was facing an impossible situation where him, as just a nomadic tribe of people, were actually coming against a king. And also, he compromised his values and the integrity of his family. I'm not saying that there were no rippling effects to this. There were some serious consequences to the decisions that Abraham made in this moment. But you see here, you see a man, and in the back of his mind, you see him operate out of a sense that he doesn't know that God will fight for him in this moment. He doesn't trust that God will fight for him. And so what does he do? He tries to lie, steal, and manipulate. Abraham's weapons in this moment was lying, dishonesty, and manipulation for the promise of safety and security. You see, Abram was quite a terrible husband and father in this moment. But what do you see God do? God fights for him. God fights for him. Before Abimelech could even touch or put his hand on Sarah, what does God do? He meets him in a dream and says, this woman that you're with is actually this man's wife. And I'm on their side. I'm on their side. And if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to destroy you. Not for my sake, but for theirs. When you walk into the room trusting and believing that God is fighting for you, that God is for you in this, then you're able to walk out. You're able to, what are you in essence able to do? You're able to lay down your weapons. You're able to put down your guard because you just know and trust that God will fight for you. Abram's weapons was lying, dishonesty, and manipulation. It was control. And you see that just reverberate throughout his generations. Isaac lied the same exact way, and Jacob was known as a liar as well, and as a cheat. But you see, Abram, God fights for him, even when he couldn't fight for himself, even when he didn't have the courage or even the integrity to fight for himself. God fights for him. Abram essentially had to lay down his weapons in order for God to fight for him. What are the weapons that you need to lay down in this moment to see God fight for you? So the 3 mantras, follow along with me. God has a plan for me. God is in this with me. God is fighting for me. We all have some sort of mantra running through our mind. Some of us, it can be good, saying, you are worthy, you're amazing. Other people's mantras can be horrific, terrible. You're ugly, you're not smart, you're stupid. But if we're able to replace the mantras that we speak to ourselves with the mantras that God is trying to impose in Abram's mind, that God has a plan for you, that God is in this with you, and God is fighting for you, then we'll be able to see what God sees. And I'm going to end with this. So praise team, you guys can come up. In Hebrews chapter 11, this is almost 1,500 years after the story and the life of Abraham. It's written about Abraham. What does it say? By faith, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. Even though he did not know where he was going, by faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, and as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she was considered him faithful who had made that promise. And so from this one man, and as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. He was looking forward to the city whose architect and builder is God. Think about this. A man, 1,500 years later, inspired by the Holy Spirit, writes about the life of Abraham. And he doesn't mention anything about him prostituting his wife. He doesn't mention anything about how he lied, how he stole, how he cheated. He didn't mention anything about how actually Abraham was kind of faithless in many instances. He didn't believe God all the time. He wasn't perfect in his belief. But how Abraham will be remembered is a man of faith. A man who took the second chance that God gave him to trust that God was the only promise keeper. That's how Abraham will be remembered. And my friends, maybe, just maybe, that's how you'll be remembered. We think God sees us like the way that we see Abraham in Genesis 12, 15, 16, and 20. We think we're going to be remembered like that. And so what are we trying to do? We're trying to make our lives perfect. We're trying to make ourselves acceptable, lovable in a way where we could have this commendation. But what if, just what if, God looks at us the way he sees Abraham in Hebrews 11? What if your destiny is not Genesis 20 as a complete screw up and someone who's made mistakes over and over again? But what if he sees you as someone in Hebrews 11? A man of faith, a woman of faith, who against all hope believed that God would keep his promise. You see, what if God sees you in a way that you don't even see yourself? That is the promise. We're all promise seekers, trying to find promise keepers. But the mistake we've made is we've settled with promise makers. We need to entrust ourselves again with the one and only promise keeper, the one and only being in human history who's kept all of his promises 100%. God's not going to remember you like Genesis 20, but he's going to remember you like Hebrews 11. As someone who was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith you shall live. Can we all rise?